I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe it was in a quiet street in Brussels, where the scent of freshly baked Moroccan bread wafted from a tiny shop run by a man who greeted every passerby with Assalamu alaikum, whether they were Muslim or not. Maybe it was in a cold train station in London, where I saw a young man pause mid-rush to lay out his prayer mat as the world blurred past him. Or maybe it was earlier. Maybe it was the restlessness in me that had always been there, kind of homesickness I couldn't name, a strange ache that grew louder the more I achieved, the more I traveled, the more I filled my life with things that were supposed to matter. I wasn't searching for Islam. I didn't even know what I was searching for, but I was listening, and something, somewhere, was calling. I grew up in a comfortably secular environment in the UK. Religion was rarely discussed except in history class or when someone died. My parents weren't anti-religion. They just didn't need it. We had values, morals, charity drives at Christmas. I was taught to be kind, to think critically, to question everything. And I did. I questioned school, authority, politics. I questioned capitalism, materialism, tradition. But I never questioned my own emptiness. I filled it with noise friends, travel, career plans. I told myself I was free. I told myself I was happy. And then came university. It's funny, looking back. University was the first place I encountered practicing Muslims, not the caricatures from the news, not the passive side characters in Western media, but real people. They weren't trying to convert anyone. They were just being. And that being felt oddly grounded. They didn't drink. They prayed regularly. They dressed modestly, but stylishly. They spoke confidently in class, but never bragged. They were the first people I met who said Insha'Allah like they really believed it. The first people who fasted for hours without complaining, and then broke their fast with gratitude and grace. I didn't understand it. Why would someone choose to live like that, to deny themselves so much in a world that encouraged indulgence? Why be bound by religion when freedom was right there? But the more I observed them, the more something inside me began to shift. I remember a conversation I had with a Muslim girl in our philosophy seminar. We were discussing Nietzsche's idea of God is dead. I expected her to be defensive or quiet. Instead, she leaned forward and said, "I understand why he said that. He was watching a society lose its soul. But that's not the God I know." That line stayed with me. What kind of God did she know? I started reading, not with the intention to convert, just to understand. I wanted to know what these people saw in Islam that gave them so much peace. I read articles, watched debates, even stumbled upon a few lectures by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and Dr. Yasir Qadi. Then I picked up a copy of the Quran English translation, of course. The first verses didn't hit me, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to carve a space inside me. This is the book in which there is no doubt, a guidance for those conscious of God. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Your Lord has not forsaken you, nor is he displeased. The language wasn't poetic in the Shakespearean sense, but it was deep. It felt alive, like it was reading me, not the other way around. At the same time, I began noticing a pattern. I wasn't the only one curious about Islam. Around me, quietly, discreetly, people were turning toward it, not in masses, not through marketing, but in twos and threes. Sometimes through interfaith dialogue, sometimes through relationships, sometimes through crisis, but always through something deeply personal. A German classmate named Lena told me she became Muslim after reading Rumi. A French guy I met at a conference reverted after falling into depression and walking into a mosque one rainy afternoon, just seeking warmth. A black British woman named Amina converted after losing her father and seeking answers the church no longer gave her. What united them wasn't background, it was sincerity. And that's when I began to realize the rise of Islam in the West wasn't some political plot or cultural invasion, as tabloids claimed. It wasn't the result of demographic shifts or immigration policies alone. It was spiritual hunger, a hunger that modernity couldn't satisfy. We were raised on individualism, taught to follow our hearts, to chase success, to consume endlessly. But when the noise settled, when the dopamine wore off, we were left with this yawning gap, something Islam spoke to with quiet authority. It didn't promise prosperity. It promised purpose. It didn't chase popularity. It preserved principles. It didn't erase questions. It invited reflection. And for many of us, those raised in secular households, shaped by liberalism but starved of meaning, that was revolutionary. But of course, the rise wasn't without friction. Islamophobia was real. You could see it in headlines, in policies, in suspicious glances on the tube. You could feel it when politicians weaponized the hijab, when women were told they were oppressed for dressing modestly, when children were asked to explain terrorism in schools as if their names made them suspects. But in spite of all that, maybe because of it, Muslims in the West grew stronger. I witnessed it. I saw Muslims in Europe and North America rise in every field: medicine, tech, academia, media. They weren't just participating in society, they were shaping it, creating halal skincare brands, launching Islamic fintech, producing powerful documentaries, writing best-selling novels, starting charities, running for office. They weren't hiding their faith, they were centering it. And what amazed me even more was how Islam began to reach places we never expected. In prison systems, Islam became the fastest-growing religion, bringing redemption to men and women society had discarded. In the arts, Muslim creators began to weave their stories into mainstream narratives, not as sidekicks or villains, but as heroes of their own arcs. In wellness spaces, the discipline of prayer, fasting, and modesty began to challenge Western ideas of self-care and liberation. Even non-Muslims started adopting Islamic habits: mindful eating, gratitude journaling, regular detoxing, digital minimalism, without realizing where they came from. Islam wasn't invading, it was resonating. I remember the day I attended my first Jummah prayer. I hadn't converted yet. I just wanted to experience it. I stood in the back, unsure, overwhelmed by the rows of men bowing and prostrating in unison. The khutbah was about sincerity, ikhlas. It was simple, but it pierced my heart. After the prayer, a man approached me. He must have seen the uncertainty on my face. He smiled and said, "First time?" I nodded. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't judge. He just said, "May God guide you." That night, I cried. Not because I was emotional, but because I finally understood. Islam wasn't just a religion. It was a home, a compass, a mirror. And when I took my shahada months later, quietly, tearfully, surrounded by people who didn't know my name but welcomed me as a sister, I felt like I had returned to something ancient, something that had always been waiting for me. Now, years later, I look around and see the West changing, slowly, subtly, but surely. There are more mosques, more halal restaurants, more hijabis in universities, more converts speaking out, more Muslim-run mental health services, more interfaith initiatives, more Friday prayers in parks and university halls. There is still resistance, there is still fear, But there is also light. I see second-generation Muslims reclaiming their heritage. I see converts navigating their new identities with courage. I see non-Muslims asking deeper questions, not just what Muslims believe, but why. The rise of Islam in the West isn't about numbers. It's about presence. And presence leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to understanding. Understanding leads to connection. And connection can heal. I don't pretend to know where the world is headed. Politics shift. Policies change. But I do know this: the landscape of the West is evolving. And Islam is not a stranger in this land. It's becoming part of its story. Not as a guest, but as a contributor, a conscience, a light. So when people ask me today, why is Islam rising in the West? I tell them my story. Not because it's special, but because it's not. There are thousands like it, and if you listen closely, maybe one day it will echo in your heart too.